Cold but beautiful day. Can all of you hear well enough? Are yes? Okay. All right. We'll get started in a couple moments. We are live though, so people are kind of watching. We are a number of people here in the sanctuary, probably the most people we've had in a long time, given COVID. And a number of people will be on live stream and watching on YouTube and Facebook. So there are a number of different ways in which people will be connected to us. You and I will talk for a while, and then we'll open it up for questions. And we'll get started in a moment.
Okay.
I have some water here. So I'll pull up a little bit. David, welcome. Great seeing you. Terrific seeing you. And I have to tell you personally, I'm really deeply honored and touched that you've agreed to be part of this series, anticipating my own retirement. This is a great honor to me that you're engaged in this and have agreed to be here.
Well, let me just, at the risk of sounding patronizing in response, I didn't hesitate to want to be a part of this because you've been not just a great friend to me and my family, but a great leader in this community and really nationally. And you've linked, as is appropriate, spirituality and Judaism with a construct about how we should think about life and about the challenges that we face as a society and the challenges that we face as individuals in the society. So it's my honor to be with you, Sam, really.
Well, as I said, I am touched, and you're being very kind and generous. I don't think you need much of an introduction to people. You were chief strategist for Barack Obama's presidential campaigns, appointed senior advisor to the president. You're now a senior political commentator for CNN and director of the nonpartisan University of Chicago Institute of Politics. We know you well. You've been a friend of not only of mine, but of this congregation, and have always been a figure of inspiration as well as tremendous insight. And when we first agreed, or when you first agreed to do this, and we first talked about this, I wasn't sure that there would be enough for us to talk about. I wasn't sure that there would be anything going on in the world.
But we didn't anticipate the tragedy in Ukraine at that time.
Well, we certainly didn't. And we're living in a challenging time of turmoil, of trauma. This is a frightening moment in world history. So how did we get here?
Complicated question. Let me just say as a preface to it, I feel, as a lover of democracy and freedom and a believer in a rules-based world, I'm drawn to this and I can't take my eyes off of it. But I also feel emotionally drawn to it because my father came from Ukraine during the pogroms and spent the first 10 years of his life dealing with violence and death around him until his home was blown up and he became one of the with his family, the many Jewish refugees from that area. So, I see the faces of these young children who are fleeing, and with looks of bewilderment and pain on their faces. And I wonder about what it was like for my dad when he left there a century ago. Um, so, uh, I think that there are a lot of different interpretations about how we got here. Putin has his own, which is that that the West heaped indignities on Russia after the Iron Curtain fell, um, by inviting former Soviet republics um, the Western orbit, into NATO, into and that the EU incorporating them as well. But um, you know, I think that this is ultimately about one. I can tell you, Sam, that 10 years um, or ago, I guess it was now longer than that, but in 2009, I went to Russia with President Obama, and he was to meet with Putin, who was then prime minister and not president, but he was doing it, as a matter of protocol. He met with him, and Putin, for the first hour of what turned out to be a 2-hour meeting, he just engaged in a monologue bordering on diatribe that you heard elements of in his speech to the country when he announced this, what he won't call a war, but the war on Ukraine. And it was all about his sort of distorted view of history. And so, so much of this has to do with his own aspirations to recreate the Russian Empire and to redress what he thinks was a great injustice that was visited on Russia and on the Soviet Union. Why now? Because I think he saw an opportunity. It looked after the Trump years and after Afghanistan as if NATO was fractured and this was a time of weakness. I think that the departure of Chancellor Merkel, who was a strong leader in the European coalition, was something that probably encouraged him. He may have seen in the desultory way in which Afghanistan came down in the summer, a sense that maybe the U.S. wasn't up to the task of responding. I mean, I think there were a lot of elements to this. Oil prices being high, and the fact that he had put away sufficient reserves, anticipating economic sanctions, or so he thought. And I think he felt that he took the measure of Zelensky and felt that Zelensky was not necessarily a serious opponent here. And I think he just miscalculated on a whole series of fronts. He is, unwittingly helped reknit the NATO coalition in a way no one could have imagined. I mean, just weeks ago, the idea that Germany would double its defense budget, was unthinkable. The fact that there's such a high level of coordination, which I think, by the way, is a tribute to President Biden and the way he's led through this episode. I think he underestimated Biden, but he certainly underestimated Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, whose courage. I mean, it's now become an overworked cliche, but this is a Churchillian moment for Zelensky, and he's more than matched this moment. And the Ukrainian people, inspired by him, are showing unbelievable courage. What you worry about is how the story ends, and we don't know the answer to that yet, but it seems almost certain that it's going to end with a lot more bloodshed and a lot more suffering.
Well, talking about your father's experience, and also this is back to who you are. So much of what you've cared about has been evidenced by your feeling of empathy, as you've shared with us in terms of Obamacare and how you felt from a personal point of view, but also now in this, the human level and your relationship with history is so important. You talked about Putin underestimating Zelensky, also all those who have underestimated Biden, and to see this coalition come together and be as strong as it is. I think today your friend Ben Rhodes just published a piece in The Atlantic about this hinge moment in history. How do you see that larger narrative
Yeah.
taking place?
Look, I think it is a hinge moment. You know, uh, I'm sure everyone who is listening to us now is very much steeped in the history of the 20th century and the horrors that we experienced in the 20th century. And as a result of those horrors, we created a kind of rules-based global order. And the US has been at the center of that. This is a challenge to that. And I think, and I have to go back and read Ben's piece, but you know, one of the things that's troubled me, if I could link domestic politics to global geopolitical events, one of the things that always troubled me about Donald Trump was not his policies. I disagreed with him vehemently, but many of them, not all of them. But I also I disagree with a lot of presidents on a lot of subjects. The thing that I think is something we can't compromise on, a principle we can't ignore, is the idea that societies and the world depend on, and certainly democracies, on adherence to a set of rules and norms and laws and institutions. And without them, you know, we see chaos and mayhem and the kinds of events we're seeing in Ukraine now. Vladimir Putin doesn't believe in those. He does not believe, he believes, as I think Donald Trump does, to be honest with you, that the world is essentially the Hunger Games, and the weak, the strong prevail and the weak, you know, don't. The weak fall away, and that there are no rules or laws or norms, that rules and laws and norms are for the weak, are for suckers. That has catastrophic meaning for the world, and it has catastrophic meaning for democracies. So I think this is a hinge moment. If Putin prevails and is not made to pay a huge penalty here, then other autocrats around the world are going to be encouraged to do the same. And and who knows where he'll stop. And suddenly you see the disintegration of the structures that have been put in place, the understandings and the rules and international laws that have been put in place since World War II. You know, and I think that is that's a very dark specter. And so there's a lot at stake here. This isn't just about Ukraine, but it's about how the world is going to organize itself in the coming decades and in this century.
Well, one of the norms and institutions of democracy that we have relied on has been a free press, media, the concept of truth, as
Yeah.
opposed to the big lie. And that concept of truth that Putin is now saying that going into Ukraine was to denazify Ukraine,
Yes.
or that there was a genocide on the east being done by Ukraine in the west, that his big lie to his big lie to his own people, that this is not a war. And there's a danger in the fact that people are believing the big lie. His people are. And we saw it ourselves on January 6th, that surprisingly, he is using those same terms of fake news, and they're following that, and that echoes very strongly with our own experience domestically.
Yeah, well, listen, if anybody doubts the importance of an independent media, look at what's happening in Russia today. You know, we as Jews, I think, have a particular sensitivity to the profane invocation of Nazism here in a false way, and the irony, of course, is intensified by the fact that the person who leads the government he's calling a Nazi government is Zelensky, a Jew. It just compounds the outrageousness of it. But what we've seen in the last 2 weeks, and it's been going on to some degree progressively since the invasion of Crimea, is Vladimir Putin strangling an independent media and telling a completely fantastic story over state media again and again and again. I was just watching stories today, people, you know, because there's a kinship between the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, and there are relatives across borders here. And a young woman was talking, and some of you may have seen this on CNN, about writing, I think it was her aunt, about the destruction that was being rained down on her city. And the aunt said, that's not true, that's not happening. And so, yeah, there are large numbers of Russians who believe that, you know, Russia's actions are purely defensive, and that there are these malign fascistic forces that have taken hold in Ukraine that they're pushing back against, that have been executing a genocide against Russian-speaking citizens there, when in fact it is Vladimir Putin who's executing a genocide right now in Ukraine, including against Russian-speaking people. And it's, you know, look, it goes to a larger question, and that is just the role of truth, not just of a free media, but of the manipulation of media, of disinformation. Putin is a master manipulator of people, and he's using state media to do it. And he's trying to strangle, you know, the independent outlets on the internet. Interestingly, the internet can be used as a tool for disinformation, but it also can be a source of truth and light. And he's trying to choke that off as well. But we see how insidious it can be when people don't have access to the truth and to facts. And we in this country really need to value that highly, and not allow that to be taken from us ever, because it's a core. There's a reason the First Amendment is the First Amendment.
Well, that's true. I think many of us are frustrated that even when the truth comes out here domestically, that there is a significant portion of our society that doesn't want to believe the truth, that wants to say that that phone call, which was made to extort Zelensky, and the report of Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Ambassador Yovanovitch, was rejected by an entire political leadership of our nation.
Yeah.
That's a very frustrating thing for us when we see that, and this is even with a free press.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Well, you know, part of the problem that we have today is we have a siloization of information. We have many, many choices, in terms of where to receive our information. When we were young, there were 3 networks, and you watched one of them, and but they all were basically dealing with the same set of facts, and then you made judgments about those facts. Now, we have a situation where you can really choose a media outlet that affirms your views, even if it doesn't inform your views. And we create these information silos, and everyone inside your silo is your kin, and everyone outside is an alien and dangerous. And that's something that we have to think through. How do we penetrate that? How do we reach beyond? How do we make efforts to reach beyond our silos? How do we get people to reach beyond? There's the fact that 70% of Republicans believe that the last election was somehow fraudulent, despite the fact that it's probably the most scrutinized election in American history, despite the fact that 61, I think, courts threw out allegations of fraud, including many that had judges that were appointed by Donald Trump. Despite all of that, there is this belief that somehow there was something fraudulent about the last election. That's given root to a bunch of insidious legislation around the country. That's a very, very concerning thing. And I don't have a ready answer for how we combat that, but it's insidious and dangerous. And I run the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, something I founded in 2013. We're having a major conference in April in conjunction with the Atlantic, in which we're bringing together experts from around the world on disinformation, and hopefully developing some strategies for how we deal with it, because some of this is it's a mechanical process whereby algorithms on social media platforms are programmed to keep people online, and it turns out the thing that keeps people online are often hate and conspiracy theories and the very things that go to the heart of democracy. So there are a lot of aspects to this. There are great aspects to the new modern media tableau. We have access to more genuine information than ever before. On the other hand, it is subject to manipulation in ways that we've never experienced before, and that's something that we have to confront.
I'm going to jump, if you don't mind, to a Jewish subject, to a subject of Israel, but based on kind of what you were just talking about in terms of those who are willing to believe, particularly both in terms of the election and January 6th. Netanyahu himself was a purveyor of the big lie, frightening his people, saying that there were hordes of Arabs coming to vote against in the election, and that there were caravans of infiltrators from Africa. He used exactly those same terms, and Israel was always the subject of bipartisan support across the board, Democrats and Republicans. And Netanyahu came to Washington and spoke in Congress against a sitting president of the United States. And just this past week, AIPAC endorsed 37 Republicans who voted against certifying the election of Biden. And the only thing that I can understand is, given the fact that 85% of American Jews support the Democrats, without talking about this in partisan terms, there's just a reliance now on the evangelical ultra-right, that's the alliance that at least some people in Israel are making. And for AIPAC to support Jim Jordan and Joe Wilson and Elise Stefanik And Steve Scalise is dispiriting and disheartening from an American Jewish point of view.
Yeah. You know, I think that, first of all, I've always had trouble with the idea that if you care passionately about Israel, and I was, you know, I still remember when my grandfather on my other side of the family was a Russian immigrant, and when he and my grandmother, you know, the family pooled its resources to send them to Israel, and it was and he had a brother over there, and it was the most joyous, one of the most joyous occasions of our life when we took him to the airport when he came back, you know, and I remember traveling to Israel as a young journalist in my 20s when I worked for the Chicago Tribune. And I was so enchanted that I really thought about staying, because I felt like here were people who really appreciated the meaning of life, because life was every day was a gift, and they lived under, you know, great threat. And I understood that. But it also, you know, it created values that were really important. And that was before Israel became as commercialized as we are in some ways. But having said all that, that doesn't mean that if you care about Israel, that means that your devotion to Israel means that you're devoted to whatever the policy is, the prevailing policy of the government at that moment. You can respectfully disagree. I still believe that that there should be a two-state solution in Israel, and there has to be an answer to the Palestinian you know, aspirations. And without that, you know, there's going to be a constant struggle. The future of Israel as a Jewish democratic state is very much threatened. And you know, I'll say this, and it may not sit well with everyone here, but you know, I believe so deeply in Jewish values, and being a perpetual occupier is not consistent with them. But Netanyahu, I mean, he is a brilliant practitioner of the sort of dark arts of politics, and this was all about power and holding on to power and galvanizing his base by invoking, you know, hate, as you describe it. And you know, I don't know how we embrace that. You know, I certainly don't. As for AIPAC, you know, I'm sure they would say, look, whatever Jim Jordan's politics are, that he's a strong supporter of Israel. I'm sure that would be their answer, and that our job is you know, we're here to support people who are supportive of Israel. And look, you know, I worked back in 1984. The race that got me out of journalism and into politics was for someone who I revered, Paul Simon, the congressman who was running for the Senate. A lot of the impetus behind his candidacy was from AIPAC, because they were eager to defeat Charles Percy, who was the Senate Foreign Relations chair, a senator from Illinois, because he was viewed as insufficiently supportive of Israel, or insufficiently strong relative to Palestinians, and they, you know, without the financial support they supported, Simon probably wouldn't have been elected president. So, you know, there's a long history and legacy here of supporting people who they think will, will support Israel. I will say, just as an aside, a story related to this. Someone who was a leading figure in AIPAC at the time approached me after the election, which we won. I was just out of the newspaper business. I ended up managing Simon's campaign. We won, despite the fact that Reagan was carrying the state by 500,000 votes. And it was a big upset victory. And this person, and I don't, I'm not going to share a name because it was done in good faith, but offered me the chance to, he wanted to put me into the political consulting business and offered financial backing. And they said, and the only thing is you can only support the candidates the community supports. And by the community, I think he meant AIPAC. And I said, well, I strongly support Israel, but I also care deeply about America, and I don't want to sacrifice one for the other. I think you can support candidates who do both. And if that means that I couldn't work for a candidate who was running against someone who supported Israel but had terrible policies here, then I have to respectfully decline your offer, which was painful, I have to tell you, Rabbi, because I could have used the money back then. But this has been a longstanding saga. And yes, what Netanyahu did, I think, was very, very damaging in terms of, coming here, really partisanizing the relationship in the way that he did has been really destructive. And I worry about that. I worry about flagging support. And I'm sorry for, you touched a button here. You put in a quarter and now you're getting 10 plays. But, I work with young people all the time and I see what's going on campus. And some of it has been spurred by organized activities. And we know that to kind of fracture the relationship between young people and Israel. But some of it is that these kids are deeply, deeply concerned about human rights, and they're concerned about what's happening in Gaza, on the West Bank, and that concerns me. I would like to have an answer for them. I can easily explain the threat of violence that Israel lives under and the rain of missiles and what that means, and so on. But the other side of the equation is harder, and it would be easier if we really could pursue a just and lasting peace.
I had said this past Friday night that, reflecting on what you just said, that it's very difficult for young people who are going to Israel to park their social justice values on the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport before they enter into customs. They're not willing to do that, and we shouldn't expect them to do that. But I'm going to pivot based on what you just said about Charles Percy. We're here in Illinois. You're not at the moment, but you're basically a Chicagoan.
I'm there in spirit.
Yes,
Rabbi.
you're always part of Illinois. And we know that not only Percy, but Jim Thompson and Jim Edgar and Percy, and for us to realize that Everett Dirksen, when he, as a Republican and was minority leader of the Senate, helped write and pass the 1964 and 1968 Civil Rights Acts. Is there any hope that we're going to get back to a place where there is a coalition of the politics of decency between Republicans and Democrats, at least some level of being able to work together with respect?
I want to believe that. I think that part of the way we get there is, at the end of the day, democracy is something that we can't take for granted. Democracy is a responsibility. I wrote a book a few years back, and the epigram was Robert Kennedy saying the future is not a gift, it's an achievement. And that is certainly true about democracy. Democracy is not a self-sustaining thing. It is an obligation that's passed on from generation to generation. And frankly, I think we've gotten a little soft about that. And so part of what needs to happen is that people, there is a middle in this country, and those people need to get involved in primary elections and in demanding something different. The reason that we have the problems we have is that we have a perverse reward system right now. We have a lot of non-competitive congressional districts, for example, where you run in primaries where the most strident voices tend to be the most heard voices, and you never have to worry about a general election where most of the voters participate and most of the country lives in that sort of broad middle. And so, if politicians, most politicians see their first obligation or their first motivation as to get elected and to stay elected and to hold power. And until there's a price to be paid for extremism, for obstreperousness, for an unwillingness to work in good faith, until there is a price to be paid in terms of the holding on to power, we're going to struggle. I will say this, I have a lot of friends across the political spectrum. I'm proud of that. Some of them I disagree with deeply on many issues, but I know they care passionately about the country. I must say one of my newer friends has been Liz Cheney, who I probably shouldn't mention that. If that were to leak out, it would only make her situation worse in Wyoming. But I don't agree with her on many, many, many things. And yet, on the most important thing, on the nature of our democracy and the importance to stand up for it, and that there are lines that no one can cross, and that rules do matter, and that the rule of law does matter, and that institutions do matter. On that, she has been a champion, and I honor her for that. But I have friends across the political spectrum, and I talk to them, and some of them are people whose names would probably cause your teeth to chatter. And yet when you talk to them privately, they know that this isn't where they need to want to be. But there's a reign of terror going on in the Republican Party right now. Some of it emanates from Donald Trump. Some of it emanates from this media ecosystem that I mentioned, which, by the way, is also, supported by malign forces like the Russians, who want to divide us and who want to bog our democracy down. We need to be radical centrists. We need to be engaged citizens in a way that we've never been before, and we need to support those people who are willing to support the rule of law and the basic concept that in democracy we need to compromise and we need to work together, and we need to recognize that there's something more important than whether the red team wins or the blue team wins. I'm hopeful that we can get there. And last point on this, I am hopeful in part because of these young people, and because, the students that I work with are much less concerned about partisan politics than they are about trying to change the world for the better. And, they say, of course, let's start an app. Let's do things outside of the political system. And my point to them is, do all those things because they're necessary and important, and we can learn from them and we can progress from them. But you can't do it in substitute of a functional political system. And I think they get that. And, I think there's a more tolerant group of Americans who are coming into leadership. And if we can just navigate our way through this next decade, I think we're going to get to a better place. Navigating ourselves through the next decade is going to be a challenge.
Well, we might have hoped that January 6th was enough of a shock to the system, as it was to Liz Cheney, clearly, but not to enough others. we might hope that what's going on in Ukraine is a shock to the system in terms of world politics and the Western world, and looking at young people, people that you're working with at University of Chicago and elsewhere, can you be hopeful?
Yes. Well, I have to be. I have to be. I have to be hopeful because I think the alternative is too awful and unacceptable. I mean, I wrote a book a few years ago called Believer, and so I'm not going to give up at this stage in my life. I believe that what democracy hands us are the tools to shape our own future. This is what the Ukrainians are fighting for right now. And but democracy is also an ongoing battle between hope and cynicism. And right now, cynicism has gotten the upper hand, or it has in recent years. Maybe watching people struggle and sacrifice their very lives, as the first Americans did, for freedom and for the ability to chart their own future, will, as you suggest, rekindle an appreciation for what we have in this country. But I think as long as these tools exist, as long as we have the ability to bring about change, peaceful change, and as long as we are serious about them and appreciate them and protect them, I think that the possibility of a better future exists. And I do think that, I'm the least qualified person to talk in depth about emerging technologies and so on. It's easy to be concerned about the challenges that they bring. They also bring the possibility of solving so many problems that are in front of us in terms of, climate and, water and, all kinds of things that separate us and represent threats to us. So, I choose to be hopeful. I insist on being hopeful, because to not be hopeful is essentially to die in a way. And I'm not willing. That's not my dad and his family didn't navigate what they navigated to come to this country, so that the next generation, could passively, surrender to cynicism and worse.
So I'm going to turn it to people who are here in the sanctuary and those who might be online who want to put a question in the chat. Please do that. We're going to curate those questions as well. But if anyone here in the sanctuary wants to raise a hand and ask David a question, Dan?
Hi, David. First-time caller, long-time fan. You talked tonight about many parts of your professional life, your podcasts, preparing for a CNN broadcast, your work with young people, your work at U of C, and of course you make time for Sukkot Shalom. So my question is, which parts do you enjoy the most and why?
It's an interesting question. First of all, what I've, like so many people, what I've learned during this pandemic is that the things that I thought were most gratifying in my life are less important than the things that I knew were important, but haven't devoted enough time to. And so now, when I leave here, my son and my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren will be here, and I've been blessed. I've been married I guess I have been married 42 years, and my wife Susan is an extraordinary person, and her company is as exciting to me today as it was the day we first met. And then, I have a child. I have 3 kids. They're all fantastic. My older daughter, Lauren, has had a lot of struggles with from 7 months old with epilepsy that really rendered her life and our lives. And for 20 years, we couldn't get control of her seizures, and it left her with significant deficits. And yet she fought her way through all of those. And she lives in Misericordia now, which is not far from you. And she's the most inspiring person that I know. For all she's been through, she's positive and she's loving and warm. So I value all of that ahead of the great experiences that I've had. But I don't know how to value. I enjoy doing the CNN work because it gives me a platform, and I enjoy my colleagues there, and it allows me to participate in the national debate. I love my podcast, particularly the Axe Files, because I always think that people have stories. My podcast is very much about people's stories, and sometimes there are people you don't even, they may be people who you aren't inclined to hear about. I did a podcast some years back. It actually was in Kyiv. We were there for a conference with Karl Rove, who was my counterpart in the Bush administration, and sort of the bête noire of a lot of Democrats. But we had this one thing in common, which is that we had a lot of things in common, obviously, because we were in the political wars, as it were. But we both had a parent who died of suicide, and died by suicide. And I was younger than he when he experienced it. But we had a long talk on this podcast about that, and it was and got many, many, many letters, calls, emails about it. So I really enjoy that. I realized late in life that I'm really a storyteller, and that's been what I've been doing all my life as a reporter in politics and now. And I enjoy plumbing, the stories of people's lives and learning more about them, because I find it's easier to dislike people when you know them. It's easier to relate to them when you understand the path they've traveled. And so I enjoy that. And that's what I'm doing now. I just to finish, I had a, extraordinary experience, journey with Barack Obama. And my experience in the White House was, something I would wouldn't trade for anything. And the ability to do things that impact on people's lives, because my daughter had been so ill and because we almost went bankrupt as a result of her medical problems, being there to help pass the Affordable Care Act I wept the night that it passed. And I wasn't weeping because it was a great political victory for Barack Obama. I was weeping because I knew that there were families all over America who wouldn't go through the torment that we went through trying to pay our bills and keep our daughter whole. And to be able to participate in that was, the gift of a lifetime. So I've been blessed, and I'm aware of that every day.
David, I have always seen your sense of empathy and caring be one of the great gifts to this nation, because you acted not just on politics, but on that sense of humanitarianism that is so deep within you, whether through Lauren, your own experience with your father, his experience in Ukraine as a young person. All of that has so shaped you and who you are and what your values are and how you've brought those values into the political arena. I have great admiration for you.
That is I so appreciate that. I will say the ability to work with Obama and to take, as I said, take that journey with him was so important. You know, once I stopped sobbing the night we passed the Affordable Care Act, I went to find him in the White House. And I told him, you know, how grateful I was on behalf of all those people who wouldn't have to go through what my family went through, and he was well aware because we were good friends. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "That's why we do the work." And that was the single most clarifying thing anyone has ever said to me. That's why we do the work. It's not ultimately, you know, about winning an election. It's about what you can do with the authority that you get when you win an election, with the opportunity that you get when you win an election. So, you know, it was one of the great blessings of my life to have that opportunity with him in particular, because he exemplified the values that I believed in. And I should point out, Rabbi, that the son and daughter-in-law who are coming over are they are husband and wife in no small measure because of you, because you presided at their wedding. So I will. They're going to be tickled that I'm leaving a Zoom with you and having dinner with them and their beautiful kids. So
well, I would love to meet the kids. Michael has been very supportive of my retirement, and I'm grateful to him for that. And so you can send that greeting to him.
I will.
I dropped him a note just last week. Are there other? Yeah, Harry, go ahead.
David, thank you for your service to the country and for honoring Rabbi Gordon with us tonight. Before I get to my question, I want to mention I started a nonprofit called Unify America that is a grassroots organization specifically to try to gather and organize what you call the centrists, the exhausted majority, who are most of us who want to see the system changed. And we are putting together a deliberation to allow regular citizens and college students to talk about various solutions to disinformation. So as long as I'm here, I'm wondering if I can score an invitation to your event in April.
Yeah, I'll work through the rabbi and we'll get your information. And it's a hot ticket, but so I can't promise anything.
All right, maybe you can sneak me in.
We'll do what we can, and I appreciate your efforts. You know, one of the things that we work on at the IOP at the university is this idea that we can disagree and work through these disagreements, and if we're willing to actually listen to each other, there are ways to understand. We had a wonderful dialogue, for example, between Deval Patrick, who was the former governor of Massachusetts, progressive, African-American, native of the south side of Chicago, and Justin Amash, who is a libertarian who served in Congress from Michigan, ultimately ran afoul of Trump, but quite conservative. And it was just a conversation about what freedom is. And it was such a thoughtful, deep conversation. What I saw in that conversation were two people earnestly listening to each other without prejudice and trying to understand each other's points of view. And it was thrilling to me to see that. And we try and model that kind of dialogue at the Institute of Politics. We need more of that. We need more of that in government. Instead of people listening to each other for opportunities to find points on which they could disagree and weaponize for political purposes, we need people to kind of earnestly work through their differences and see where there are points of agreement, and how we can find them.
The question I actually had was, you started this institute, and maybe you've started to answer the question already, but 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, how do you want the world, how do you hope the world is different because of the work, at least in part, of your institute?
Thank you for the question. I get asked this a lot, like, how do you measure success in your institute, of your institute. And I'd measure it in only one way, which is, are the students who pass through it, and it's a purely extracurricular program, so what's remarkable is that these young students who have a tremendous class load spend a lot of time with us, but I measure it by how engaged they are as citizens, how many of them go and become involved in the public space in a productive and meaningful way. And it's been extraordinary to see the numbers of people who've done it. And it isn't just people who get involved in politics or elective pursuits, but people who become journalists, people who work at NGOs, people who work at think tanks, people who work in the government in a professional capacities at the State Department, for example. And it's been so gratifying to see. I'm going to step back from my role as director in January, in part because I made a promise to myself that I would step back after 10 years. Just philosophically, I believed that 10 years was about as long as one should run an organization like that. But I'm just overwhelmed by what we've been able to accomplish. And I'm really excited about the fact that the IOP is now thoroughly interwoven in the fabric of campus life and will go on long beyond all of us. And I think will help produce good citizens and good leaders.
Andy Feiss, who was a producer with ABC News and followed you around in 2008 on the campaign trail.
Yes.
Yes, we crossed paths many times. You talked, David, about you have to hope, because otherwise is a form of death. And so you have hope for the future. But this is a period in which cynicism is, as you say, sort of winning at the moment. So my question, I have two questions. I'm going to go for a twofer.
Okay.
What do you think?
As every journalist does.
Yeah, right. It's a press conference situation. What do you think is the goal or the hope of those? Okay, so your hope is for a return of civility, compromise in the future. What do you think is the hope or the end game of those who are on the side of cynicism? What is their hope or goal? That's
power.
one.
I think the answer is power.
But to what end?
I think it's the manipulation of hate for, to marshal power. And, and let me just say, you characterize I do want civility and I do want people to work together. That doesn't mean that I don't think that we have fundamental problems that I think drive us apart in our country, that include racism, that include inequality, that include structural problems that make raise doubt about whether the American dream is a real thing or just a gauzy kind of slogan from the past. We have to address all those things. It's not just a matter of getting along. It's a matter of actually doing things and getting things done. But yeah, I think what we've seen is extraordinary cynicism. I mentioned that I know lots and lots of people on the Republican side who are friends of mine who just are like, we are going with the flow, and we're trying to survive. And, we have to try and get through that period. But part of it is to make it clear that it isn't sudden death to politically to stand up against these cynical forces, and that ultimately a better political path is one that veers more to unity and consensus rather than polarization. But That involves everybody getting involved and making, changing the incentive system. And that's what we have to try and do. And Andy, good to see you again, by the way.
Thank you. Just real quick, the other question is this. Many people have thought about the role of leadership. And just the other night, CNN had a great series on Lyndon Johnson.
Yes.
And many folks sort of wonder, what role does leadership play? If there was a leader with the dynamism or the savvy or the skill of a Lyndon Johnson or Lincoln or whoever, could a different leader, and this is not to cast any aspersions on our current leadership, but could a leader of that kind of historical nature make a difference? How much does leadership make a difference?
Yeah, I think leadership makes a great difference. I bridle a little in the sort of, well, why can't, Biden or anyone be more like Lyndon Johnson or more like FDR or more like Lincoln? Every era is different, and the challenges that Biden is confronting are extraordinary, including the polarization that we're facing today. Some of which began in the era of Lyndon Johnson, or were sort of turbocharged during that era in reactionary forces reacting to the Civil Rights Act. But I think leadership is hugely important. And I think we're seeing that in Ukraine today. One person with courage, what is it? I know Andrew Jackson is out of fashion, but I think he said one man with courage makes a majority. I do think that a person with courage can make a big difference. I mean, would we have navigated the Depression and World War II without Franklin Roosevelt? Would America be America today without Abraham Lincoln? But to say that, we also have to recognize that they were extraordinary people. And one of the great gifts of this country has been that we've been able to produce great leaders when we needed them. And, the question is, who will emerge in the coming years to help lead us through? But absolutely, I believe, another example, not an American example, Churchill, when you think about what he did in 1940 in Britain, when the odds were stacked against them. Leaders matter. Strong, charismatic, well-motivated, courageous leaders matter. And, I'm always on the hunt for, I think I work for one, but I'm always on the hunt for those. And one of the things that I try and do in working with these young people is encourage them to step up, because I see in many of them sort of the qualities of leadership that I would want in public officials, and we ought to be cultivating that and encouraging that. The cynics when those of us who are hopeful and believe in this democracy of ours feel defeated and feel like we should retreat, or that we need to retreat, or that it's not worth the fight, or that we're doomed. If Churchill felt that way, everybody in Britain would be speaking German right now. If Lincoln felt that way, we would be a country divided in half. If Roosevelt felt that way, God knows where we would be as a country. So leadership matters.
Kenny, I think you have a question from the internet.
Yes, we're going to do our best to coalesce a few.
And then I think, Yana, did you have a question as well? Not. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to do our best to coalesce a number of different things that have been asked in the online chat, particularly concerning the messaging coming out of the Democratic Party at the moment, and some of our congregants wondering why they feel that the messaging hasn't really gotten across to, as you described, the cynical folks on that side of the aisle. So again, gathering a few different people's questions, key pieces that you have noticed where improvements could be made, particularly with regards to the upcoming midterms and then the presidential election in 2024.
Yeah, well, I should say as a disclaimer before I answer this question that I was the message guy in the White House before the 2010 election, and we lost 63 seats. So I always bridle a little about this question because, you know, the problem that Democrats have right now, to me, yes, there are messaging issues. I think that there were messaging issues around the virus that were sort of disastrous, and you know, there's some other things that I could point to, but you know, you can't message away 8% inflation. You can't message away the sort of societal psychic damage of the worst pandemic in a century, and what that has done, and how the mood that has left people in, you know. And you hear this out of Washington a lot, like if we just tell people how good things are and how much we've done for them, they will be happy and they will vote for us. That's not the way it works. People, you know, hearing people say, you know, well, actually the economy is quite strong, is not an effective tactic. You have to meet people where they live. And that's something we learned, frankly, in 2009, 2010. People are in a foul mood right now because this whole experience with COVID has been unsettling. And while we have certainly snapped back to a large degree in terms of jobs and so on from the pre-pandemic time, this inflation thing is no joke, and people are feeling it in their lives. I mean, it's the most obvious. I used to look at gas prices all the time when I was in the White House, because these are sort of the obvious ways in which people measure the economy. You know, obviously the ability to get a job is the most important, but can you buy the stuff you need at a price you can afford is a big thing. So this is not a messaging problem. This is an economic problem. And so I don't want to be too hard on the president of the Democratic Party. I would only tell them that they need to meet people where they live, and they need to. And I don't think. Well, I think it's important to tell people we're going to have to sacrifice for the people of Ukraine, and that's, you know, the higher gas prices are part of that. Trying to shift the entire blame for inflation to Vladimir Putin is not going to be a successful tactic either, which is something that I've heard some of the you know, always generous with their advice people in Washington have suggested would be a great way for the Democratic Party to go. That's not going to work. You know, we've gone through a trauma together. Let's address that trauma. And then in addressing it, you can talk about things that you have done and are doing to lead us in the right direction. But don't insist that on your own success when people aren't feeling like things are very good.
So, David, no one would want us not to have gone through the challenge of COVID and the pandemic, but one of the unintended positive consequences has been we've actually been able to expand the reach of our message, and through opportunities like this to be able to share this evening with you. You're in Arizona, we're here, but to have you through Zoom and then through live streaming go into the homes of our congregants and to be here in our sanctuary with us, that's a gift. And we're grateful for that, but especially we're grateful for your continuing engagement with us and your engagement with the world outside. You are a
Well,
gift to this nation, and you're a gift to us, and we are
Rabbi,
truly
I
grateful.
so appreciate that. I need to say two things. One, I'd be remiss if I went through this whole hour without mentioning a member of your congregation, John Cooper, who was my partner for a quarter of a century, and without whom I wouldn't have been able to do the things that I did. Brilliant and well motivated, as you know, and just a wonderful person. So I want to acknowledge John. And then the second thing is, in leaving, I just want to say a word about myself, Judaism, and you. As I mentioned, my father was a Jewish immigrant. My grandfather on the other side was an Orthodox Jew, a Russian immigrant. I was bar mitzvahed, and I always had a very strong sense of Jewish identity. But, and I think this is not an uncommon story among a lot of American Jews, and I think it's been problematical. There was a sense of conscription about participation in Hebrew school and religion, and preparing for bar mitzvah and so on. Grandpa expects this of you, and so on and so forth. And what I missed, and what made me sort of I consider myself more of a secular Jew now. I became allergic because of that. And when in fact there is this tremendous sense of value and worth and sustenance in these ancient teachings and lessons, and that give us a sense of how to live good lives. And by good, I mean lives that are not just about ourselves, but about those around us, and how we can enhance those around us. I so admire you, Rabbi, because that is how you approach faith, and that is how you approach your role as a teacher. The congregation has been lucky to have you all these years. We as a community are lucky to have you. I just so appreciate you. So when I was offered the opportunity to be here today, I was touched, I was honored, just so I could tell you how much you mean to all of us. And so thank you for all you've done. And I look forward to many more conversations. They may not be in front of audiences, but I look forward to more conversations in the years to come.
David, thank you. I cannot thank you enough. You are a treasure, a good friend, and you have been very generous in your words to me and in your time shared with us this evening. Please give your family my love as well, and continue enjoying your grandchildren.
I will.
Thank you.
I can't wait to pass the message along. They'll be tickled. So, thanks everybody for listening and participating.
Thank you, everyone.